before the sun had fully climbed over Briar Glen Reserve, before the sprinklers whispered across perfect lawns, and before the neighborhood gates began opening for luxury cars and private school drop-offs, a police cruiser rolled slowly past a quiet corner house and changed one man's life forever. The officer behind the wheel saw an African-American man in an old navy hoodie, sweatpants and work gloves standing beside a damaged mailbox. He saw the man bend over with a wrench in his hand. He saw the expensive homes, the polished driveways, the high stone walls, and the kind of neighborhood where people called security if a delivery truck stayed too long. And in that officer's mind, the story was already written. The man did not belong there. The officer did not know that the man fixing that mailbox was Brigadier General Marcus Ellison, one of the most respected cyber defense commanders in the United States Air Force. He did not know that Marcus had moved into that very house only days earlier, after being appointed to lead one of the most sensitive military defense commands in the region. He did not know that behind the quiet eyes, the worn gloves, and the faded hoodie was a man trusted with national security secrets, a man whose phone calls could wake generals, federal agents, and commanders before breakfast. Officer Nathan Whitaker thought he had found an easy target in a wealthy neighborhood. He was about to learn that some mistakes do not echo quietly. Some mistakes roll like thunder. Briar Glen Reserve was built to feel separate from the rest of the world. Its entrance sat behind a tall iron gate guarded by cameras, trimmed hedges, and a small security station with tinted windows. Inside, the roads curved gently around artificial ponds, old oak trees, and houses so large they seemed less like homes and more like quiet monuments to success. Every lawn looked freshly brushed. Every porch light glowed warm and golden. Even the silence felt expensive. Marcus Ellison had moved there because it was close to his new command center, only 15 minutes from the secure facility, where he would soon oversee thousands of military and civilian specialists, protecting American networks from foreign attacks. He had not chosen the neighborhood for status. He chose it because the house had a study with thick walls, a private gate, and enough space for his younger sister and her children to visit whenever they wanted. After 30 years of service, long deployments, classified briefings, missed holidays, and lonely hotel rooms near bases all over the world, Marcus wanted one quiet place where the mornings belonged to him. That morning began with a small annoyance. Sometime during the night, a delivery truck or careless driver had clipped the brick mailbox at the edge of his property, knocking one side loose and leaving the metal door hanging crooked. Marcus noticed it just after 5:30, when the sky was still soft and grey and the air carried the cool freshness of early spring. He had woken before his alarm, as he always did, made coffee strong enough to taste like memory, and stepped outside to get the paper. The damaged mailbox made him pause. Most people in Briar Glen would have called maintenance, the homeowners association, or some private repair service. Marcus simply went back inside, changed out of his sleep shirt, pulled on an old Navy Air Force hoodie from a base fun run nearly 10 years earlier, and found a pair of work gloves in a moving box. He liked fixing simple things with his own hands. There was peace in it. A mailbox did not argue. A loose brick did not send encrypted threat reports at midnight. A bent hinge did not require a secure briefing room. It just needed patience, pressure, and the right tool. He was tightening the hinge when his smartwatch vibrated softly against his wrist. A secure call came through from Captain Elise Turner, his aide, who had been awake since before dawn, organizing his first full week of command meetings. Marcus tapped the watch with the back of his glove and answered, leaving the call muted while he worked. Elise's voice came through clear and professional, though touched with the kind of careful urgency that never completely disappeared from military life. She reminded him about the 800 briefing, the installation commander's welcome, and the cyber readiness review scheduled afterward. Marcus smiled faintly as he listened. He gave a quiet hum, more to himself than to her, because he had not unmuted. He planned to let her finish, repair the mailbox, then walk back inside for a shower and uniform. The morning still felt harmless, Birds moved in the trees. A neighbor's garage door opened somewhere down the street. The world had the sleepy calm of a place that believed trouble stopped at the gate. The police cruiser appeared at the far end of the lane like a dark shape sliding through mist. It moved slowly, too slowly for a routine patrol, its tires whispering over the perfect asphalt. Behind the wheel sat Officer Nathan Whitaker, a 12-year veteran of the local police department and a man who wore his uniform like a warning. Whitaker had worked this wealthy side of the county long enough to believe he understood who belonged behind those gates and who did not. He carried himself with the stiff confidence of someone who had been protected too many times from the consequences of his own temper. Complaints had followed him for years. Traffic stops that lasted too long. Searches that found nothing. Residents who said he spoke to them like they were already guilty. Younger officers learned quickly that Whitaker liked control more than truth. Sitting beside him that morning was Officer Liam Foster, 26 years old. New to the department, still careful with his words, and still foolish enough to believe that doing the right thing would always be welcomed by the people above him. Whitaker's eyes locked on Marcus before the cruiser even reached the corner. He slowed down until the vehicle almost crawled. Foster looked out through the passenger window and saw a man repairing a mailbox, nothing more. He saw the gloves, the tools, the house behind him, the open garage, and the half-empty moving boxes stacked near the side door. It seemed obvious. Somebody had moved in. Something had broken. The man was fixing it. But Whitaker did not see it that way. His mouth tightened. He looked from Marcus to the large house behind him, then to the old hoodie and sweatpants, and something cold moved across his face. Foster noticed it immediately, that familiar shift in older officers when suspicion became personal. Foster said quietly that the man was probably a homeowner. Whitaker gave him a look that made the inside of the cruiser feel smaller. He said people like that did not usually live in Briar Glen, not in a house like that, not at the edge of the reserve where the biggest lots began. Foster looked back out the window, uneasy, and said nothing more. Marcus heard the cruiser before he looked up. The low engine sound stopped behind him, followed by the small click of a door opening. He turned slowly, one gloved hand still resting on the mailbox. He saw two officers stepping out, one moving with hard purpose, the other a few steps behind, uncertain. Marcus had spent his adult life reading rooms, flight lines, command centers, and foreign negotiation tables. He knew the difference between a routine greeting and a confrontation before a word was spoken. Whitaker's hand rested near his belt. His chin was raised. His eyes were already accusing. Marcus exhaled once, calm and quiet, then lowered the wrench to the grass. Whitaker did not start with good morning. He did not ask if everything was all right. He looked Marcus up and down and asked what he was doing there. The question landed in the cool morning air with more weight than it deserved. Marcus glanced at the mailbox, then back at the officer. He said he was repairing his mailbox. His voice was even, deep, and controlled, the kind of voice that had quieted briefing rooms filled with colonels and contractors. Whitaker smirked slightly, as if the answer amused him. He asked if Marcus expected him to believe that. Marcus remained still. He said the house behind him was his. He had moved in recently. Whitaker looked past him toward the large brick home with its dark windows and new curtains, then back at Marcus's old hoodie. The disbelief on his face did not soften. It hardened. Foster shifted near the cruiser. He looked at the house number painted on the curb and then at the brass numbers beside the front door. Something about Marcus's calm unsettled him, but not in the way Whitaker seemed unsettled. This was not the nervous calm of someone hiding something. This was the steady calm of someone choosing every word carefully. Whitaker stepped closer and said there had been break-ins in the area. Marcus nodded once and said he understood the concern, but he was on his own property. Whitaker demanded identification. Marcus looked at him for a long second, then asked if he was being detained. The words were polite, but they changed the temperature of the moment. Whitaker's jaw tightened. He said he was asking the questions. Marcus replied that he was happy to cooperate within the law, but the officer needed a valid reason to detain him on his own property. He then asked for a supervisor. Captain Elise Turner, still connected through the muted smartwatch, heard only faint outdoor sounds at first. Wind, a low voice, then another voice, sharper. She looked up from the briefing folder on her desk inside the administrative wing of the base, her pen stopping mid-note. Marcus had not ended the call. That was unusual. He was precise about communications, especially secure ones. She tapped her headset and said, "Sir?" There was no answer. Then she heard Marcus clearly say that he was not refusing lawful instructions and that he wanted a supervisor present. Elise straightened in her chair. The room around her seemed to fade. Marcus Ellison did not raise his voice unless something serious was happening. She checked the call status and saw it was still muted from his side. A second later, the mute icon disappeared. Whitaker did not notice the small movement of Marcus's finger against his watch. He was too focused on winning the moment. To him, Marcus's calm was not cooperation, it was defiance. He took another step forward and told Marcus to turn around. Marcus did not move. He said again that he was standing on his own property and had committed no crime. Foster spoke up then, softly but clearly, saying maybe they should verify the address before doing anything else. Whitaker snapped his head toward him. The look he gave Foster was enough to silence most rookies. Foster's mouth closed, but his eyes stayed on Marcus. The next few seconds stretched thin and strange, the way dangerous moments often do. A sprinkler clicked on across the street, sending silver arcs of water across a lawn. Somewhere, a dog barked once from inside a house. Marcus saw Whitaker's shoulders tense. He knew what was coming before it happened. Whitaker grabbed his arm with sudden force and twisted it behind his back. Marcus's body reacted with a sharp breath, but he did not pull away. He said clearly that he was not resisting. Whitaker shouted that he was resisting anyway, loud enough for any camera, any witness, any later report. Foster stepped forward, alarmed, and told Whitaker to slow down. Whitaker ignored him. He forced Marcus against the side of the mailbox pillar, the rough brick scraping the front of the old hoodie, then pulled one wrist behind him and locked a cuff around it. The metal clicked shut with a sound that seemed far too loud for such a quiet street. Elise Turner heard everything. She heard Marcus say he was not resisting. She heard the officer accuse him anyway. She heard the second officer's nervous warning. Her face went cold. She stood so quickly her chair rolled backward into the wall. With one hand, she grabbed the secure phone on her desk. With the other, she pulled up Marcus's location through the authorized command tracking system. The signal blinked inside Briar Glen Reserve, not at the base, not on a highway, not anywhere near a secure facility. His personal device and watch were in the same place, stationary at first, then shifting toward the road. Elise did not hesitate. She called the base security desk and used a command phrase that made the airman on duty stop breathing for half a second. Then she called Major General Evelyn Shaw. On the street, Whitaker searched Marcus roughly, patting the hoodie, the sweatpants, the pockets. He found a wallet and pulled it free. Marcus told him his identification was inside and that it would confirm both his name and address. Whitaker opened it with irritated movements, expecting a driver's license, maybe a credit card, maybe nothing useful. Instead, he found the military identification card tucked behind the clear window. For a moment, his eyes passed over the rank and name without understanding. Brigadier General Marcus A. Ellison, United States Air Force. The photograph showed the same face, clean-shaven, composed, in dress uniform. Foster saw it from a few feet away and felt his stomach drop. Whitaker saw Foster's expression and immediately closed the wallet. Marcus turned his head slightly. His cheek was near the brick, but his voice remained calm. He asked the officer to verify the identification through proper channels. Whitaker shoved the wallet into his own pocket and said it looked fake. Foster's eyes widened. He said, almost under his breath, that it did not look fake at all. Whitaker told him to get back in the cruiser. Then he pulled Marcus away from the mailbox, guided him toward the rear door, and told him he was under arrest for trespassing, obstruction, and resisting. Marcus looked at him with a sadness that was almost heavier than anger. He said the officer was making a serious mistake. Whitaker laughed once, dry and empty, and pushed him into the back seat. The inside of the cruiser was cramped and cold. Marcus shifted carefully, the cuffs pressing into his wrists. Through the partition, he watched Whitaker slide behind the wheel with the stiff movements of a man pretending he had control. Foster got into the passenger seat, pale and silent. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, leaving the damaged mailbox, the open garage, and the quiet house behind. In the rear window, Marcus could see the small shape of the mailbox growing smaller, the morning light touching its broken edge. It was strange, he thought, how quickly a peaceful morning could become evidence. Foster's hands trembled slightly as he held his phone low near his lap. He knew he should not be doing it. He knew Whitaker would explode if he noticed, but something inside him had crossed a line the moment that military ID appeared. He typed Marcus's name into the search bar, adding Air Force because the card had burned itself into his memory. The result appeared almost instantly. An official Department of Defense announcement filled the screen, dated just days earlier. There was Marcus in full uniform, standing beside senior officials, named as the newly appointed commander of the Regional Cyber Defense Center. Foster stopped breathing. His thumb hovered over the screen. He looked back through the partition at the man sitting quietly in handcuffs, then back at the announcement. The world inside the cruiser tilted. Foster whispered Whitaker's name and told him to pull over. Whitaker did not look at him. Foster said it again, louder this time, and held up the phone. Whitaker glanced over just long enough to see the image, the uniform, the title, the rank. For 1 second, panic flashed behind his eyes. Then denial swallowed it. He told Foster to put the phone away. Foster said they had arrested a general. Whitaker tightened his grip on the steering wheel and said they had arrested a suspect who refused orders. The cruiser sped toward the station, but behind them, beyond the gates of Briar Glen and past the waking neighborhoods, phones were already ringing inside secure offices. Base security vehicles were moving. Federal agents were being notified. And somewhere across town, Major General Evelyn Shaw was stepping into her uniform with the calm, terrible focus of a woman who understood exactly what had just happened. Major General Evelyn Shaw did not hurry, because people like her did not need to hurry to make the room move around them. She stepped into her uniform with steady hands, fastened each button with quiet precision, and listened as Captain Elise Turner gave the report over the secure line. Brigadier General Marcus Ellison had been detained outside his own home. His military identification had been found and ignored. He was in the back of a local police cruiser, handcuffed, being taken away by an officer who had already been warned by his own partner. Shaw stood still for 1 long second, her face unreadable in the pale light of her bedroom. Then she said 5 words that turned a quiet morning into a federal emergency. Track him and move now. By the time Officer Nathan Whitaker reached the main road outside Briar Glen Reserve, the world he thought he controlled had already begun closing in around him. He drove with both hands locked tightly around the steering wheel, his eyes fixed forward, his jaw working as if he were chewing on the mistake, but refusing to swallow it. Beside him, Officer Liam Foster kept looking down at his phone, then back at the man in the rear seat. Marcus Ellison sat calmly behind the partition, his shoulders straight despite the cuffs biting into his wrists. His breathing was even. His eyes were focused. He looked less like a prisoner and more like a commander silently studying a battlefield. That calm made Whitaker even angrier. It made Foster even more afraid. Foster tried one more time. He told Whitaker they needed to stop, verify the identification, and call a supervisor before this went any further. Whitaker snapped that Foster was letting a fancy title scare him. Foster said the title was not fancy, it was official, and the announcement was from the Department of Defense. Whitaker's face tightened. He said people faked things online all the time. Marcus finally spoke from the back seat, his voice low and clear through the metal screen. He told Whitaker that his aide had heard the encounter, that his location was being tracked, and that every second Whitaker continued the detention made the situation worse. Whitaker looked at him in the rearview mirror and forced a laugh that did not sound real. He told Marcus to stop pretending he was important. Marcus did not answer. He simply looked out the window at the road ahead, where the first edge of morning was turning the sky gold. Then the traffic in front of them slowed. At first, Whitaker thought it was a delivery truck or a school bus. He cursed under his breath and flicked his siren once. But the vehicles ahead did not move aside. A black SUV rolled into the center lane from the right. Another appeared from the left. A third came up behind them, close enough that Foster turned in his seat. The road narrowed, and suddenly the cruiser had nowhere to go. Whitaker hit the brake hard. Marcus leaned forward slightly from the force, the cuffs scraping his skin, but he did not make a sound. The cruiser stopped in the middle of the road, boxed in by dark vehicles with government plates and tinted windows. For a breath, everything became quiet. Then doors opened. Air Force security officers stepped out first, alert and controlled, their hands near their weapons but their movements disciplined. 2 federal agents followed, their jackets marked clearly enough that even Whitaker understood this was no local traffic stop. The last door to open belonged to Major General Evelyn Shaw. She stepped onto the road in full uniform, her presence cutting through the morning like a blade wrapped in velvet. She did not shout. She did not rush. She looked at Whitaker through the windshield with the kind of calm that made shouting unnecessary. Whitaker's hands went loose on the wheel. Foster whispered something under his breath that sounded almost like a prayer. One of the security officers ordered both officers to step out of the cruiser slowly. Foster opened his door at once, palms visible, his face pale. Whitaker sat frozen for half a second too long. The command came again, firmer this time. He opened the door and stepped out, trying to rebuild his authority in front of people who were not impressed by it. He said this was a lawful arrest and demanded to know who was interfering with police business. No one answered him directly. General Shaw walked past him as if he were a traffic cone in the wrong place. She opened the rear door herself. Marcus turned his head and met her eyes. For the first time that morning, a trace of regret moved across his face, not for himself, but for the ugliness of what she had to see. Shaw looked at the handcuffs, then at the red marks already forming around his wrists. Her expression did not change, but the air around her seemed to grow colder. She ordered the cuffs removed immediately. Foster, moving before Whitaker could stop him, reached for his keys and unlocked them with shaking fingers. The metal fell away. Marcus brought his hands forward slowly and rubbed one wrist with the other. He stepped out of the cruiser with quiet dignity, standing tall in the old Navy hoodie that now carried dust from the mailbox and a faint scrape from the brick. General Shaw asked if he needed medical attention. Marcus said he would be fine, then looked at Whitaker. He said the officer had detained him without cause, ignored proof of identity, ignored proof of address, dismissed his military ID without verification, rejected his request for a supervisor, and used force after being told repeatedly that no resistance was taking place. His voice stayed even, but every sentence landed with the weight of a sealed report. Whitaker tried to interrupt. He said Marcus looked suspicious. He said there had been break-ins. He said he had to make a judgment call. Marcus looked at him, almost sadly, and said suspicion was not a license to turn a man's home into a crime scene. Then he said what everyone already knew, but Whitaker still could not bring himself to hear. This was never about the mailbox. The local police supervisor arrived minutes later, lights flashing, tires chirping against the road as his cruiser stopped behind the federal vehicles. Captain Daniel Morris stepped out, looking annoyed at first, then confused, then deeply unsettled as he recognized the uniforms and federal agents. He asked what was happening, and General Shaw gave him the briefest version. One of his officers had handcuffed a United States Air Force Brigadier General on his own property, ignored official identification, and transported him toward booking after being warned by another officer. Morris turned toward Whitaker, and the color drained from his face. It was the look of a man realizing that an ordinary complaint had become something that could swallow a department whole. Whitaker began talking fast, He said Marcus matched a possible suspect profile. He said Marcus refused to comply. He said Foster was inexperienced and did not understand street work. Foster lowered his eyes for a moment, then raised them again. That was the moment he chose what kind of officer he would become. He stepped forward and said Whitaker was not telling the truth. He said Marcus had been calm. He said Marcus explained he owned the house. He said Marcus asked for a supervisor. He said the military ID was real and that Whitaker called it fake without checking. His voice shook, but he did not stop. Then he removed his body camera and handed it to the federal agent nearest him. Marcus watched Foster carefully. He could see the young man was afraid, but fear and cowardice were not the same thing. Foster had been afraid in the cruiser. Now he was standing inside that fear and speaking anyway. Marcus nodded once, not as forgiveness, not yet, but as recognition. General Shaw ordered all footage, radio logs, cruiser GPS data, and dispatch recordings secured. Marcus added that the smartwatch call had captured the encounter as well. Captain Elise Turner, still on the line and now standing inside the command center with 2 security officers beside her, confirmed that the recording had been preserved. Whitaker stared at Marcus, as if the world had betrayed him by keeping receipts. Captain Morris asked Whitaker for his service weapon. Whitaker's face twisted in disbelief. He said Morris could not be serious. Morris told him again, quieter this time, and that quiet made it worse. Whitaker looked around at the federal agents, the Air Force security team, Foster's pale face, Marcus's calm stare, and Shaw's controlled silence. Slowly, with clumsy fingers, he removed his weapon and handed it over. Then he was turned around, searched, and placed in cuffs of his own. The sound was clean and final. Whitaker looked down at the pavement as if he had never truly noticed how hard the ground could be. The news did not break immediately, because Marcus insisted that the investigation come before the headlines. He had spent too many years in command to mistake noise for justice. The first task was preservation. Federal agents went to his home and collected the doorbell footage showing him outside his own house, repairing his own mailbox, never leaving his property until Whitaker forced him away. They photographed the damaged brick, the scattered tools, the open garage, the boxes still visible inside. They collected the smartwatch audio, the cruiser video, and Foster's body camera footage. They pulled dispatch records and found that Whitaker had never confirmed the address, never asked security at the Briar Glen gate, never checked Marcus's identification through military channels, and never properly reported the moment he found the ID. Then they looked backward, and that was where the story grew darker. Nathan Whitaker was not a single bad morning. He was a pattern wearing a uniform. Complaint after complaint appeared in old files, some written by black residents who said they had been stopped at Briar Glen's gate for no reason, others by drivers pulled over on thin excuses, others by workers accused of stealing from homes where they had been hired to paint, repair, or deliver. Some complaints were short, written by people who seemed too tired to fight. Some were long and detailed, full of dates, badge numbers, and descriptions that matched the tone captured on Marcus's recording. Many had been closed without discipline. Some had never been entered into the official system at all. Foster gave a full statement. It was not easy for him. He admitted that he had hesitated. He admitted that he should have stepped in sooner. He admitted that he was afraid of Whitaker, afraid of being labeled weak, afraid of losing his place in a department where rookies were taught to stay quiet. Marcus listened to part of the interview later. He did not smile. He did not excuse the failure, but he understood the cost of telling the truth inside a culture built to punish it. When Foster finished, he asked if General Ellison hated him. Marcus took a moment before answering. He said hate was too heavy to carry into important work. Then he told Foster that courage shown late was still better than silence kept forever. Months passed before the trial began, but the case never lost its power. In federal court, Officer Nathan Whitaker no longer looked like the loud man on the roadside. He looked smaller in a plain suit, sitting beside lawyers who tried to soften the sharp edges of the truth. They argued that the neighborhood had suffered break-ins. They argued that officers had to make fast decisions. They argued that Marcus had questioned authority instead of simply handing over identification. But each argument faded when the recordings were played. The jury heard Marcus calmly explain that he owned the house. They heard Whitaker say what people like Marcus did and did not look like. They heard Foster warn him. They heard Marcus say he was not resisting. They heard the cuffs close. Then they saw the doorbell footage of a man repairing his own mailbox in the quiet light before dawn. When Marcus testified, the courtroom became very still. He wore his dress uniform, not to intimidate, but because the truth deserved formality. He spoke without bitterness. He explained what had happened in simple words. He described the pressure on his wrist, the brick against his chest, the moment his official identification was dismissed like a trick, and the cold realization that rank did not protect a person from prejudice when prejudice refused to see. The prosecutor asked him what he felt in the back of the cruiser. Marcus looked toward the jury and said he felt the same thing many citizens feel when authority stops listening. He felt the fear of knowing that calm may not be enough, truth may not be enough, and the law may arrive too late if the wrong person decides not to care. Foster testified after him. His voice was unsteady at first, but it grew stronger. He told the jury that Whitaker had made up his mind before the cruiser stopped. He said Marcus had never threatened them, never raised his hands in anger, never tried to run. He said Whitaker saw a black man in a wealthy neighborhood and built the rest of the story around that. Across the courtroom, Whitaker stared at the table. For the first time, there was nowhere to hide behind the badge, the report, the uniform, or the department's old habit of looking away. The verdict came late on a rainy afternoon. Guilty on the civil rights charge, guilty on false imprisonment, guilty on assault under color of law. The words passed through the courtroom with quiet force. Whitaker closed his eyes, as if darkness could make them disappear. At sentencing, the judge spoke about public trust, about the danger of power without humility, and about the deep harm done when a person with authority uses fear instead of judgment. Whitaker was sentenced to federal prison and permanently barred from serving in law enforcement again. The department that had protected him faced its own investigation. Supervisors resigned. Files were reopened. Old complaints were finally read by people who had no interest in burying them. But Marcus Ellison refused to let the story end with one man in prison. Personal victory had never been enough for him. A commander did not simply survive a breach and move on. A commander studied the weakness, repaired the system, and made sure the next attack did not succeed so easily. So, after the trial, Marcus stood in a community center, not far from Briar Glen Reserve, in front of local residents, military families, police recruits, city leaders, and young people who had come because they had seen the story on the news. He did not speak like a man looking for applause. He spoke like a man offering a way forward. The program began small, a few workshops on civil rights, a few training sessions on de-escalation, a few honest conversations between base officials, local police, and residents who had spent years feeling watched instead of protected. But small things can grow when the right people refuse to let them die. Within a year, the program expanded across the county. Officers were trained to verify before escalating, to listen before grabbing, to understand that authority was not weakened by respect. Young recruits heard Foster speak about the morning he almost stayed silent, and how close that silence came to ruining an innocent man's life. Community members told their stories in rooms where, for once, someone in uniform had to sit still and hear them. Marcus still lived in Briar Glen Reserve. The mailbox was repaired, stronger than before, with one brick slightly lighter than the others where the damage had been patched. Some mornings, when the air was cool and the neighborhood was quiet, he would stand near it with a cup of coffee and watch the sun rise over the clean streets. To anyone passing by, he might have looked like an ordinary homeowner enjoying the peace he had earned. And in many ways, that was exactly what he was. But beneath that peace was a story the neighborhood would never forget. A story about a man mistaken for a threat while standing on his own land. A story about a young officer who found the courage to tell the truth. A story about a badge that became a weapon and a truth that became stronger than fear. Racism backed by authority is dangerous because it can turn an ordinary morning into a nightmare. It can make a mailbox look like evidence, a homeowner look like a suspect, and a calm voice sound like defiance to someone determined not to listen. But truth has a way of surviving the hands that try to bury it. Discipline has a way of outlasting panic. Integrity has a way of standing quietly until the room finally understands who really held the power all along. Officer Nathan Whitaker thought the gate, the cruiser, and the badge made him untouchable. Brigadier General Marcus Ellison proved that real strength does not need to shout. It only needs to stand firm, remember every detail, and let the truth arrive with the force of daylight. If this story made you think about power, justice, and the courage it takes to stay calm when everything is against you, make sure to share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe stories like this matter, stay with us for more powerful, true-to-life dramas, where arrogance meets accountability, and the truth always finds its way home.